Welcome back to the Future Archive. Today, we examine archived broadcasts from July 15, 2026, a day when humanity confronted climate reality, energy dilemmas, and the usual assortment of self-inflicted complications. We'll cover a grim climate milestone, an oil drilling debate, a river of dead fish, a legal setback for Rastafarians in Kenya, and a proposed social media curfew for British teens. The first story. Met Office declares 20th century climate permanently gone. On July 15, 2026, the UK's Met Office announced that the climate of the 20th century had effectively vanished. Scientists confirmed that atmospheric and oceanic conditions had shifted so dramatically that the baseline weather patterns of the 1900s were no longer observable. The declaration was based on decades of data showing rising global temperatures, shifting precipitation patterns, and increasing extreme weather events. The Met Office warned that without immediate, drastic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, these changes would become irreversible. The announcement was a stark reminder that humanity had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. This moment marked the official end of climate denialism as a mainstream position. By 2026, even the most stubborn skeptics were hard-pressed to ignore the evidence piling up in their own backyards. From a historical perspective, this was the point where the conversation shifted from if climate change was happening to how badly it would disrupt civilization. Of course, humanity's favorite strategy, postponing the problem, remained in full effect. Spoiler: it didn't work out well for the postponers. The Met Office's announcement was a scientific full stop, though governments and corporations would spend another decade pretending the sentence could still be edited. The 20th century's climate died quietly. No one noticed until the obituary was published. The second story. Andy Burnham's North Sea oil dilemma highlights global energy tensions. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, found himself at the center of a contentious debate over North Sea oil drilling. On one side, economic advocates argued that expanding offshore drilling would create jobs, boost local economies, and reduce dependence on foreign energy sources. On the other, climate activists and environmental groups warned that new drilling would undermine the UK's commitments to reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to renewable energy. Burnham, a prominent Labour politician, was caught between these competing pressures, reflecting a broader global struggle to balance immediate economic needs with long-term environmental sustainability. The debate in Manchester mirrored similar conflicts in cities and nations worldwide, as leaders grappled with the reality that energy policy could no longer be treated as a purely economic issue. Burnham's dilemma was a microcosm of the 2020s, a time when every decision, no matter how local, felt like a choice between survival today and survival tomorrow. Historically, this was the era when the contradiction between growth and sustainability became impossible to ignore. The North Sea, once a symbol of British energy independence, had become a battleground for the soul of the country's future. By 2050, we'd look back on these debates with the benefit of hindsight, though, as ever, hindsight proved to be 20/20 only after the damage was done. The great subsidization of carbon removal technologies, which would dominate the 2040s, was still a glimmer in a lobbyist's eye. When your energy policy requires a coin flip, you've already lost the game. The third story. Mass fish die-off in major river sparks outrage over industrial pollution. On July 15, 2026, residents near a major river, later identified as the River Trent in England, reported a shocking sight: thousands of dead fish floating on the surface. Investigations revealed that industrial discharge, likely from a nearby chemical plant, had caused a sudden drop in oxygen levels, suffocating the aquatic life. The incident reignited public outrage over corporate accountability and the enforcement of environmental regulations. Local activists demanded stricter penalties for polluters, while industry representatives downplayed the event as an isolated incident. The die-off was a grim reminder of the ongoing tension between industrial activity and ecological health, a tension that showed no signs of easing. This was not the first river to become a graveyard for fish, nor would it be the last. By 2026, such events had become almost routine, met with a mix of outrage and resignation. The tragedy of the commons played out in real time, as corporations externalized costs onto ecosystems that had no voice in the boardroom. Evidence later suggested an intern at the chemical plant may have miscalculated the discharge levels. Though the company naturally blamed a one-time system error, the great spreadsheet crisis was alive and well. From a historical standpoint, this incident was a foreshadowing of the mass extinction events that would dominate headlines by the 2040s, though by then humanity had largely stopped being surprised. The river didn't kill the fish. The fish were just the first to notice the poison. The fourth story. Kenyan court rejects Rastafarian bid to legalize cannabis for religious use. In Kenya, a Rastafarian community's years-long legal battle to use cannabis for religious purposes was dealt a significant blow on July 15, 2026. The High Court ruled that the country's strict drug laws, which criminalize the possession and use of cannabis, did not provide exceptions for religious practices. The Rastafarians argued that cannabis, or ganja, was a sacred part of their spiritual rituals, and that prohibiting its use violated their right to freedom of religion. The court, however, upheld the existing laws, citing public health concerns and international drug control treaties. The ruling underscored the ongoing tension between cultural traditions and modern legal systems, as well as the challenges faced by minority groups seeking to practice their faiths in a rapidly changing world. This case was a classic example of the law's struggle to keep pace with society's evolving understanding of human rights and cultural practices. From a 2050 perspective, it's almost quaint to recall a time when cannabis legalization was still a contentious issue in many parts of the world. By the mid-21st century, the substance would be as regulated and as mundane as alcohol or tobacco in most jurisdictions. The Kenyan ruling also highlighted a recurring historical irony. The same legal systems that claimed to uphold freedom often proved remarkably inflexible when it came to accommodating the beliefs of those who didn't fit the mold. As for the Rastafarians, they continued their practices in the shadows, as they had for generations. Some traditions, it turned out, were more stubborn than the law. The court said no to ganja. The Rastafarians said yes to the status quo. The fifth story. UK proposes midnight social media curfew for teens aged 16 and 17. In a move aimed at addressing growing concerns about digital addiction and mental health, UK lawmakers proposed a ban on social media use for 16 and 17-year-olds after midnight. The proposal, announced on July 15, 2026, was part of a broader effort to regulate the impact of technology on young people. Supporters argued that the curfew would help teens get adequate sleep, reduce anxiety, and improve overall well-being. Critics, however, condemned the measure as an overreach, arguing that it infringed on personal freedoms and would be difficult to enforce. The debate reflected a growing global conversation about the responsibilities of tech companies, the role of government in regulating digital spaces, and the balance between protection and paternalism. This was the opening salvo in what would later be known as the subscription wars, though at the time no one realized that the real battle would not be over access, but over attention. By 2026, the writing was on the wall. Social media had become the new opiate of the masses, and governments were scrambling to mitigate the fallout. The midnight curfew was a well-intentioned but clumsy attempt to address a problem that had already metastasized far beyond the reach of legislation. Historically, it's worth noting that this was also the era when AI safety committees began popping up like ceremonial mushrooms after the rain. Lots of noise, very little substance. As for the teens, they simply switched to VPNs. Humanity's favorite strategy, it seemed, applied to digital life as well. Teenagers have always found a way. The internet just made it easier to watch. July 15, 2026 was a day of reckonings: climatic, economic, environmental, cultural, and digital. Each story revealed humanity's enduring habit of creating problems it wasn't yet ready to solve. As we've seen time and again in this series, the past is a stubborn teacher, and its lessons are often learned too late. This has been the Future Archive. The past, as always, is not going anywhere.